Seat. I just wanted to point out our tzedakah box here with all the news of the week and so much in the Jewish world. We also know that the Prime Minister of Israel was in San Francisco and in New York this week for the United Nations General Assembly. And this month, Beth Am is supporting an important organization in Israel, the Israeli Religious Action Center, Iraq, which is a legal and advocacy arm of the Reform movement, which works for pluralism and tries to live out the vision of the Declaration of Independence, a country for all of Israel's citizens to call home, and one that Jews all around the world are proud of. So Iraq does amazing work. There's tzedakah boxes where you picked up your prayer books and your kippot. If you're streaming, you can donate online, and Beth-Am or at Beth-Am is our Venmo. We're trying to be as generous as possible during the month of September to stand with our allies in Israel, the individuals in Israel that continue to fight and stand up for an Israel that is a democratic state for all Jewish people and all of its citizens. We moved, Rabbi Weissman decided to move the teaching, the drash that we give tonight, to right before Kaddish, because specifically tomorrow morning in our Torah reading, we are Parshat Ha'azinu, the passage from the book of Deuteronomy that discusses the death of Moses. It's at the very end of the Torah, and really right before the Israelites cross into the Promised Land. The text says, "That very day Adonai spoke to Moses, ascend these heights of Abrim to Nebo, which is in the land of Moab facing Jericho, and view the land of Canaan, which I am giving the Israelites as their holding. You shall die on the mountain that you are about to ascend, and shall be gathered to your kin, just as your brother Aaron died on Mount Hor, and was gathered to his kin." The Hebrew word for eulogy is chesped. And according to the Talmud, a chesped is a way to honor the departed and comfort the bereaved. In the Bible, a chesped is oftentimes more an act of lament and memory than a formal eulogy. And many biblical figures, including Sarah and Jacob and Samuel and Jonathan and Saul, receive chesped in the Bible. And the Talmud tells a beautiful story of Reish Lakish, one of the great rabbis of the Talmud, offering a chesped for one of his students, Rabbi Hiya ben Ada, by quoting a verse from Song of Songs, "My beloved is gone down to the garden to gather lilies." On both Rosh Hashanah and then again this weekend, or Sunday and Monday on Yom Kippur, we read that haunting prayer of the Unatana Tokef, which is our prayer of judgment. And we know the lines from that prayer. Who shall live and who shall die? Who by fire and who by water? And as we are still in these days of awe and reflecting on our new year and the fragility of these days, I just wanted to take a moment, as we often do in this season, to reflect on a few of the Jews who passed away in 5783. The acting world lost a few prominent Jewish actors and actresses this past year, including Alan Arkin, the son of Ukrainian and German immigrants, who was born in Brooklyn, where he was born in 1934, and he became one of the most versatile actors in all of Hollywood. In 1987, he starred in the television film Escape from Sobibor, portraying Leon Feldhender, a Polish Jewish resistance fighter who organized the 1943 prisoner uprising at the Sobibor extermination camp. That role earned Arkin nominations for an Emmy and a Golden Globe Award for Best Supporting Actor. And Paul Rubens was born Paul Rubenfeld, but better known as Pee Wee Herman, died this past July. His father, Milton, had been a top fighter pilot who served in the Royal Air Force and then the U.S. Army Air Force during World War II. And he became one of 5 Jewish pilots who flew in smuggled fighter planes and helped establish the Israeli Air Force. Rubin's weird and delightful comedy was an homage to Jewish comedians who came before him, including Eddie Cantor, the former vaudevillian who played a frenetic, wide-eyed innocent in a series of popular movie comedies in the 1930s. Chaim Topol died this past March at the age of 87. A recipient of 2 Golden Globe Awards and a nominee for both an Academy Award and a Tony, Topol long ranked among Israel's most decorated actors. He said that he played Tevye the Dairyman in the show Fiddler on the Roof over 3,500 times. In 2015, he was celebrated for his contributions to film and culture with the Israel Prize for Lifetime Achievement, his country's most prestigious honor. Up until a few years ago, he remained involved in theater and said he still fielded requests to play Tevye. Topol said, "I wasn't brought up in Hollywood. I was brought up in a kibbutz. But sometimes I'm surprised when I come to China or when I come to Tokyo or when I come to France or when I come wherever, and the clerk at the immigration says, 'Tevye, Tevye, Tevye.'" Barbara Walters, the iconic newswoman and celebrity interviewer who made history for women and Jewish anchors on mainstream American news television, died at 93 last December. Born to Jewish immigrants in Boston, Walters' interviews were iconic. She could get a sit-in with anyone, from Fidel Castro to Barack Obama and Michael Jackson to Katharine Hepburn. In 1973, she interviewed Golda Meir in Jerusalem. In her memoir called Audition, 2008 memoir called Audition, she says that visit to Israel was a game changer. Walters recalled feeling overwhelmed and experiencing quite a strong connection. During her visit, she met Moshe Dayan, then the head of Israel's defense minister, whom she described as a dashing and heroic figure who was very good looking. A few years later, in 1977, Barbara Walters went back to Israel, where she managed to get a joint interview with Anwar el-Sadat, the Egyptian president, and the Prime Minister of Israel, Menachem Begin. She describes Sadat's arrival on Jewish soil as one of the most glorious days I have ever experienced. In that moment, she said, that groundbreaking interview cemented her status as a real journalist. A little less than a year ago, Hannah Pick Gosselaar died in Jerusalem. She appears multiple times in Anne Frank's iconic diary as both a close friend and a premonition of the Holocaust horrors to come for Anne Frank's family. As Anne wrote after having a nightmare about her friend, her eyes were very big and she looked so sadly and reproachfully at me that I could read in her eyes, "Oh, Anne, why have you deserted me? Help, oh, help me. Rescue me from this hell." Their final meeting would be at a fence in the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. After recuperating from her liberation from the camp in the Netherlands and then later in Switzerland, Hannah Pick Gosselaar emigrated in 1947 to Israel, where she became a pediatric nurse and a Holocaust speaker. Her friendship with Frank was a subject of a book, Memories of Anne Frank, Reflections of a Childhood Friend, and then later a film, My Best Friend, Anne Frank, which came out in 2021. She died last October at the age of 93. And then finally, Rabbi Harold Kushner, one of the most influential rabbis of the 20th century, died last April. A synagogue rabbi for more than 30 years, Rabbi Kushner is likely most famous for his book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. In the book, Kushner labors to reconcile the two Jewish beliefs of God's omnipotence and benevolence with the reality of human suffering. He says, "Can I, in good faith, continue to teach people that the world is good and that a kind and loving God is responsible for what happens in it. Ultimately, Kushner concluded that God's ability is limited when it comes to controlling the hazards of life that result in tragedy of a widespread but also a small scale, such as the Holocaust or the death of a child. It is a view that was very controversial when he wrote that book in 1980 and runs afoul of traditional Jewish teaching about God. It earned him many critics from many different Orthodox Jews, as well as rebuttals from other Jewish theologians. But it resonated widely for a long time and with many people. Jewish and non-Jewish individuals read that book, sending it to the top of the New York Times bestsellers list. More than 4 million copies of When Bad Things Happen to Good People have been sold, and it's in at least a dozen languages. Rabbi Kushner wrote his own epitaph, his own chesped, in the last words of one of his last books, called 9 Essential Things I've Learned About Life. This is what Harold Kushner said. Dear world, we've been through a lot together over the past 8 decades, you and I. Marriages, births, deaths, fulfillment and disappointment, war and peace, good times and hard times. There were days when you were more generous to me than I could possibly have deserved. And there were days when you cheated me out of the things I felt I was entitled to. There were days when you looked so achingly beautiful that I could hardly believe you were mine, and days when you broke my heart and reduced me to tears. But with it all, I choose to love you. I will love you whether you deserve it or not. And how does one measure that? I love you in part because you are the only world I have. I love you because I like who I am better when I do. But mostly I love you because loving you makes it easier for me to be grateful for today and hopeful about tomorrow. Love does that. Faithfully yours, Harold Kushner. As we head to Mourner's Kaddish, we remember our own friends and family who passed this year and in past years. Whether their names are spoken out loud or in our hearts, we remember them. May their memories always be for a blessing. Words of Kaddish are on page 86.